Stefan, this is your this is your initiative to bring James back and to bring Cathy on board. So
Yeah.
hopefully Cathy will be here soon. So
Are they here?
I saw Cathy on screen when I went to the Citizens Climate Lobby meeting in Swindon.
Gary, did you promote Cathy?
She's promoted, and all she needs to do is just turn on her camera.
Okay. She's coming in. Okay. Hello, Cathy. So let me introduce. So you know James. He was here on January 15th. So he's the co-founder of CCM Europe, and Cathy is here representing the CCM Canada. CCM is for Citizens Climate Lobby. They will speak about it much better than I am. Hi, Cathy.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Very nice meeting you on screen.
Likewise.
So I will just, that was just a short introduction. I'm happy that you were able to join us. And Ingmar wanted to say hello.
Yeah, hi Cathy. I didn't know you were here. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, what a great segue to what we're about to talk about, because you're right. It only takes a small number of people in real world relations to make a huge difference. And I think Canada is a great example of that. And you're absolutely correct. And nice to see you.
So just for everybody who's listening online, we've got some real experts in carbon pricing here. So Stefan's been pushing this for many, many years. So Stefan many times has said carbon pricing is the single most important thing can be done in the world. I was reading the Guardian article just last week on state oil producers, and I absolutely thought of you guys because what control do we have over state oil producers who still produce, I don't know, whatever the figure is, James, maybe, Shell and BP are big in the news, but in fact 80% of the world's oil or whatever is produced by state organizations. And of course the control that we all have over those is that if there is a tax on oil and gas, then they will have to pay the tax on their products as well. So getting back to the expertise on this call, Stefan's been pushing this for a long while. James, you came on our last call. Thanks ever so much for joining us again. James, a real expert in articulating this case. And Cathy, I saw you on video a couple of years ago, went down to Swindon in the UK for the CCL annual meeting and had the pleasure of meeting everybody there and hearing you talk on video from Canada. So real expertise here. So, Stefan, who's going to kick this off? You or James, or straight over to Cathy?
I'm happy to go straight over to Cathy. Maybe James and I will come later.
Okay.
Well, I shall get started, and I will share my screen and give a 10-minute presentation, at the most 15. Stop me at any time. I can sometimes speak Canadian, so please, if I say a word that doesn't quite resonate on the other side of the Atlantic, do stop me, and hopefully I'll be able to share my screen.
So please try and make it 10 minutes rather than 15, because people will want a lot of questions on this, I'm sure.
Okay, I will. Okay, so I'm going to present about Canada's Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, and it's basically Canada's climate income policy. And for those of you who don't know me, I work as the program director at Citizens Climate International, and I also work as the national director of Citizens Climate Lobby in Canada, and I founded the first chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby outside the USA. I'm going to quickly go through this. Prior to 2015, Canada had a conservative government that wasn't doing a lot of significant things for the climate. And then something happened in 2015. We had a big change of government. We went from a conservative government to what we call a liberal government here in Canada. I know it varies around the world. Those are their official titles, though. And by October 2016, Canada had outlined the Pan-Canadian framework. They had consulted with the people of Canada, as well as NGOs and all sorts of civil society and industry, and started presenting to us. And then in October 2018, we had the federal policy was announced. And in March 2019, we started getting our dividends from our carbon pricing policy for those of us who live in provinces or territories that have the policy. And but one thing about it, it started at $20 a ton and it halted at $50 a ton. And then in October 2019, we had a national election where a lot of people say the only thing that won was carbon pricing, because 2/3 of Canadians voted for parties that have carbon pricing. And then in November 20, we had our first climate accountability legislation announced, and carbon pricing policy rising past 2022. In Canada. These are the heroes that did us. This was us in Ottawa in October 2018. In 2 days, we lobbied 54 members of parliament, but up to that point, we had lobbied almost 800 times our members of parliament in Canada between 2010 and October 2018. This is our federal backstop carbon pricing policy. And I think what makes it so significant for Europe is Canada is a lot like the European Union in that our provinces and territories have considerable say over their climate and energy policies, just like you would imagine akin to what happens in Europe. Many of the countries, well, obviously all those countries have a considerable amount of say in what their carbon pricing policy is. So we have what is called a federal backstop policy, and if you don't meet it, your province or territory can either sign up for it or it will have it imposed on you. There are two components to it. There's a consumer component and a heavy industry component. The consumer component, it's an upstream fuel or heating oil tax, gas or natural gas, and the consumers do not pay the fuel charge directly to the government. They pay it to the distributors. And then there's a second component. It's called the output-based pricing system. We're a tiny little country. We can't enact border carbon adjustments. So to help our industries, as they were pricing carbon, they were put under a different system that still sends a market signal, still is reducing greenhouse gas emissions, although it is a much smaller portion of the greenhouse gas a Pollution Pricing Act price. It's somewhere between 80 to 90%, depending on your industry and depending on how well you are performing within your subcategory. So it started at $20 a ton in 2019, and it halted in 2022 at $50 a ton. So we had some issues with it, but before I say that, it's going to reduce carbon emissions by 90 megatons according to our federal data. And you can get that information online. This is federal data. And actually, without carbon pricing, our emissions would rise. Of note, most Canadians come out ahead. Again, a very complex slide, but I know some people might want to go back. We have what is called the Parliamentary Budget Office in Canada, and they do all the heavy lifting of digging into like the data. And most Canadians under the federal carbon pricing policy come out ahead. So that's Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and New Brunswick. And here's an independent agency. Again, I know this is a very complex slide, but I know some people might want to come back and look at the slide. And again, it shows that most Canadians under the federal carbon pricing policy get more money back in what they pay in carbon fees than what they get back in their climate income. So
Cathy, just come back to that slide because that's really important.
Yes.
So just looking at the first one, Alberta. So it's different. Okay, so why is it different in Ontario? So that the lowest income, $20,000 or less, they pay the savings a lot less in Ontario than it is in Saskatchewan. So why is that, Cathy?
Ontario phased out all of our coal-fired power plants by 2014. So we have almost a zero carbon grid. We do have some natural gas on it, but it's mostly nuclear with a little bit of wind and solar. So basically we have a very low carbon grid in Ontario, and that explains most of the difference.
Okay, and these are all Canadian dollars rather than US dollars?
Oh, of course they're Canadian dollars.
That's what I thought, yeah. Okay, so basically what it's saying then, the people who are earning the least, which is $20,000 or less in your example here, then in some of these states they get back 1,000 Canadian dollars each year.
Yeah, and that's just for 2020, and it continues to rise. they get more and more money back compared to what they're paying year after year.
Okay, wow. Okay, so thank you, Cathy. Carry on.
Okay, cool. Stop me at any time.
Sure.
It's a whistle top tour. So anyways, between 2018 and 2020, we kept lobbying, and there was an election in there as well, but we wanted the carbon price to rise past 2022. We were getting the rebates in our income tax, and most people didn't know they were getting rebates. So we wanted at least twice yearly rebates through a dividend check or a direct deposit. We wanted our government to study border carbon adjustments. They need to agree upon carbon pricing equivalencies between the various jurisdictions. So the states and the provinces and territories, because it's going to be very difficult to enact border carbon adjustments if we don't have uniformity of our carbon pricing. We also wanted climate accountability laws to protect our hard-won gains. And again, a note, there was an election. So this is what we lobbied for. That's what it looks for. And in 2020, our members had 135 meetings with parliamentarians, and they had a whole bunch of letters to the editor published and columns and all that across Canada. And they also conducted 146 outreach events. And we cover approximately 120 constituencies of the 338 constituencies across Canada over 41 groups. And very busy slide again, but basically the government cut and pasted our lobbying document into what they announced on in December 2020. So they're actually going to 22 to 2030 at $50 a ton per year, and they're continuing to return it back to the households. And instead of getting it annual, we're getting it quarterly. So we're going to be actually seeing it. They're going to study the border carbon adjustments with the EU and also with our North American partners, which is Mexico and the United States. And they're also going to reviewing, the carbon pricing equivalencies between the provinces. And they decided to start the dialogue on enacting climate accountability laws as well. So we were very excited that day. And this is just, circling that they're going to give the money back to the people. But what is the multi-trillion-dollar question? Does it work? And the largest study ever on carbon pricing, which you can find at Science Alert, basically says that for countries that have been pricing carbon, that their emissions fell by 2% per year over 2007 to 2017. Compared to the countries that did not price carbon. So yeah, and this is with low carbon prices. Imagine if we had higher carbon prices. This is economic modeling by Citizens Climate Lobby about the IPCC data, and they extrapolated out, and they showed that we could get pretty close to the 1.5C goal, lower end of the goal, with the sort of carbon pricing we've been lobbying for at Citizens Climate Lobby. So obviously we need other policies, but it certainly does a lot of the heavy lifting. And there's a fantastic YouTube video at Citizens Climate Lobby that I have in the slides that you can watch this. But what struck me most about...
Sorry, Cathy, before you move on, what's that chart saying? It's saying that to hit 1.5, what's the carbon price need to be?
Well, this is CCL's carbon fee and dividend. This is what it would do. And it gets really close to the lower end of the IPCC data and the upper end for 1.5C and the upper end of the IPCC data for hitting the 2-degree goal. So at $120 a ton by 20, getting into the upper range of achieving the temperature rise that we don't not overblowing the temperature rise. So yes, we're going to need other policies, but it really does a lot of the heavy lifting. Did that make more sense?
Yeah. So what you're saying then is that for 1.5 degrees, and it's possible, it's really helped by having a carbon price of 120 Canadian. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
This is for the whole planet.
Yeah.
Okay. What's really fascinating about any model that you look at is that models are conservative and they don't take into consideration policy-induced innovation. So when you're looking at that data, for once looking at data in a conservative way may actually work in our favor. So it's very likely that the carbon fee impacts are very likely be stronger than models can show. So imagine you're a company, an investor, and you see a carbon price going up over time. The stronger that market signal is over time, this is just going to push innovation. Like most of the models only take into consideration technologies we have right now. So carbon pricing is going to push innovation. So there's things that could happen that we don't know about as well. So this really got me excited just thinking about the possibilities. And I think everybody should go convince themselves over at the On-Roads Policy Simulator. Right now, the planet is headed towards 3.6 degrees. If we put the carbon pricing in as IPCC data and the CCL is suggesting, we can take a whole degree Celsius off of the rise between now and 2100. So yes, we need more policies, but there is no other policy that comes close as carbon pricing does to helping reduce emissions.
So Stefan, you've been saying this for a long while, and now Cathy's showing the data in En-ROADS. If people are not aware of this, you can actually get En-ROADS for yourself, and people like Stefan and others who understand this have got their own scenarios that they've developed. So once you develop a scenario, you can then share it with other people. But I suggest you take a look at En-ROADS, and Stefan, you may want to later talk a little bit about it, because it's a great tool for anybody who wants to do DIY stopping climate change. So Cathy, back over to you.
I love how you're interjecting. Keep it up. This is awesome. Okay, we also have a very similar simulator in Canada, and it's just for Canada's data. And yeah, so just with our Pan-Canadian framework, what we have planned right now, obviously we still have a gap, but this is how much Canada's carbon emissions will be lowered with carbon price, and this is above it with the gray line is how much Canada's carbon price with the current policy suite we have will be lowered without between now and 2050, and this is business as usual. So carbon pricing for Canada is really important. And we get the money back, and the bottom 80% get more money back than what we paid. So it's kind of a free way of reducing emissions. Now this gets super wonky here, but as you might remember at the beginning, I said there's two components to the carbon pricing policy. One is what the consumers pay, and one is what industries pay. So there's really amazing think tank in Canada called Canadians for Clean Prosperity teased out the data and found that if we kept business as usual, like just allow the carbon price to rise at $10 per ton up to 2030, we get about a 71 megaton drop in emissions in Canada. But if per se the full pricing that until it had the full carbon pricing policy, we get 114 megaton drop. So if the big industries was forced to pay the full price, you'd actually see an even further decrease, and then even more so. So for those of you who love data, I would encourage you to go look at the Canadians for Clean Prosperity. So basically what this slide is saying, if we take the heavy emitters and put them under the full carbon price, this really starts to reduce emissions a lot more. And to do that, we're going to need more carbon adjustments. So go Europe, push the rest of the world to do this, please, because we need to reduce emissions fast. And yeah, and similar data was found through our Parliamentary Budget Office. So that's the whistle-top tour. So I am going to stop sharing, and I'll answer questions.
So Cathy, that was fantastic. That would be really good if you're able to share those slides with them. We can put them, Gary. Let's put those on the No CO2 Facebook page along with everything else. So what happened just about a month ago, or 6 weeks ago, Cathy and James, is that in the UK there's very much awareness of the need to pay for COVID. And so suddenly carbon pricing came up with the idea that this could be a great way of paying for COVID, which means that nothing would be paid back to people, but the benefit to people is that they would not have an increase in any of the other taxes which are sort of slated for increase because of this. So what's your take if the UK were to put in a carbon tax, similar sort of numbers to what you're talking about here, and instead of recycling the money back to individuals, if they were to claw the tax out of the system, then how would that work, you think?
It's hard to get the carbon price up really high unless people get the money back. It really is. People are already paying too much taxes. And in Canada, we're pushing for tax reform. But I can't speak on behalf of Europe. I just wanted to pipe in for Canada.
Well,
James?
What do you think?
So the other interesting evidence here, when you tax carbon and don't recycle it in a way that protects society from the increasing costs, is there two clear examples of that. One is Australia, where the tax was repealed within 2 years, and the other is exactly what happened in France with the Yellow Vest movement. People go, hang on, we're all losing out here, and the legislation comes out again. And that's damaging in two ways, because firstly it damages the trust between the public and politicians that they will be okay under this sort of policy, but it also damages industry's confidence in the pricing signal. The innovation and change we need in industry to transition to zero carbon, to be more energy efficient, to find different energy sources, and to effectively decarbonise the economy requires a clear, predictable, credible signal for them to invest against, so they have known returns. If you take that away, or you make it more volatile with political and social instability, you degrade the quality of that signal that you're sending. And that's really important for industry. I mean, clearly there's a social hit as well, because clearly there is now strong social resistance in France to this type of policy, whereas we've seen in Switzerland, Canada and other countries, it can be done extremely well.
So Stefan, do come back in here. But James, you might have been on this. There was a public call this week. The UK Climate Change Committee have got a series of calls. Were you on it by any chance?
No, I've been tracking the recent media following James Hansen's letter to Boris Johnson, but I wasn't on that call.
So with this call, it's a very short call. It's 1 hour, and they hurtle through the presentations even faster than you, Cathy. Yeah, you did a great job. They went through even faster. But the question came up at the end, and I have to say I was disappointed generally with the quality of answers to the questions. But the question came up, what about a carbon tax? And what I heard was basically the answer was, well, no, we're not supporting the idea of a carbon tax because of the negative impact on people on lower incomes. Now, I'm not in favour of having a carbon tax, additional costs on people with low income. In the current circumstances, I'm concerned about those people, so we don't want anything there. But there's a couple of things that this is a risk of missing, which is one that I do think it's important that everybody sees the impact of carbon taxes, the impact of CO2 emissions, which you see much more clearly when it relates to a tax. And secondly, that there's a lot more people, to be honest, who do have money, and there's people who are emitting a lot of CO2 in the UK who do need to see the impact of this. So is it possible to design something that ring fences those people on lower incomes? I mean, say we're not going down, and clearly the route you've gone down, you're protecting those people anyway. But say we don't go down the route you're suggesting, can we ring fence people on lower incomes anyway?
The answer to that is obviously yes, and some governments do that, and what that does is clearly what you have then is you move the effect further up society. So if you're going for the type of pricing that's been implemented in the world, you can do that effectively at low carbon prices. But if you look at the pricing ambition in Canada that Cathy's just described in the next 10 years, and you look at the pricing indicated by the IPCC as necessary to decarbonize the world, you cannot achieve those levels of pricing without impacting the majority of society, which means all of the middle income families too. And therefore the principle of recycling it to all prevents edge effects. It's morally justifiable in terms of the carbon budget per human being, and it simplifies the policy. You don't get edge effects as people try to move in and out of categories. And we already know from the evidence that's out there is recycling what is a relatively small amount of money to a rich person will do nothing to offset the carbon footprint that they have in their lifestyles. But to a poor family and a middle income family, it will make a substantial difference. And so the intrinsic fairness makes it long-term politically viable. And that's what we want. It's the long-term.
So Gary, we've got one more question to go, please. Gary, one more question. So I can see the arguments both ways. So guys, what about this compromise? So say we had 50-50, say we have the carbon tax in the UK, we have the sort of figures that Cathy's talking about, but it's split 50-50. So 50% goes to the government and 50% is recycled, plus some protection for people at lowest income. Guys, is that going to work? Quick answer, James and Cathy and Stefan.
Canada took 10% off and they managed to get 2/3 majority. The statistics show every percentage point you take off recycling damages the popularity of the policy.
So Canada takes 10% now?
Roughly.
Okay, so Cathy, would 50% work?
No, I think it just muddies the communication. Personally, I think it just makes it really hard. It's hard enough to communicate as it is. I think that the simple is best.
Okay, Stefan.
Please let me second what Cathy just said, that it is a communication issue, but in many countries, it's also a legal issue. It will not be legal in France.